Good evening and welcome to this Reality Check special. The Senate Intelligence Committee has decided to postpone its vote on John Brennan's confirmation as CIA director. You might remember that President Obama announced that he would nominate Brennan to take over the CIA. Well, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky says he is prepared to put a hold on that nomination if he does not get answers about targeted killings with drones. The drone program has been a hot button issue during Brennan's confirmation, and with good reason. We take a look at Brennan's role in the drone strike program in Reality Check. In fact, we looked at it in detail just a few months ago. Tonight, here's a look back at that report. For over a year now, Reality Check has covered the issue of the Obama administration using drone strikes to kill people, including U.S. citizens accused of being terror suspects. According to several new reports, we know much more about this program. So let's begin with who is overseeing it. White House Counterterror Chief John Brennan has now seized the lead in choosing which terrorists will be targeted for drone attacks or raids. Brennan is now overseeing the use of lethal U.S. force outside of war zones within one small team at the White House. We'll get into Brennan's power to have people killed who are not in war zones in a minute. But under this new arrangement, which has been going on for about a month, Brennan now has greater input earlier in the process before making final recommendations to President Barack Obama. Here's what Brennan has said about these powers.
As a matter of international law, the United States is in an armed conflict with al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and associated forces in response to the 9/11 attacks. And we may also use force consistent with our inherent right of national self-defense.
Now, the problem with what Brennan just said there, how do you make the jump that all these kills equal national self-defense? The armed conflict with al-Qaeda and the Taliban and those associated forces carries no declaration of war. And the assassination program Brennan is overseeing is killing targets who are outside the theater of war. President Obama's kill list is described as a kind of yearbook full of photos with names and whereabouts of known and suspected terrorists, including Anwar al-Awlaki, an American citizen killed in Yemen last year by drone strike ordered by the president, and al-Awlaki's 16-year-old son, Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, also a U.S. citizen, was killed by a drone strike 2 weeks later. According to the New York Times, President Obama personally approves every new name on that expanding kill list.
It's unlawful because it allows the president to kill people, including U.S. citizens, far from any theater of war. It is dangerous because it sets a precedent.
And the other major issue here, no one seems very concerned about, is the issue of what the articles in the Times and Newsweek refer to as collateral damage. If dangerous suspects are living with their wives and families, well, sometimes the wives and families die too. If any military-age males happen to be in the targeted zone, too bad for them. In fact, they're typically deemed to be terrorists as well because they're living in proximity to other terrorists, even though they're not in, again, a theater of war. So here's what you need to know. According to the administration, if these suspects are in their teens but still deemed to be an imminent threat, they die. Now, in the case of 16-year-old U.S. citizen Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, how was he an imminent threat to this country? To this day, no one has bothered to explain. What we know, a U.S. citizen is accused of not committing a terrorist act, but encouraging terrorism. According to this president, that means not only does he, as a father, need to die, but his 16-year-old son, who's living outside of a U.S. war zone, must die as well. 2 weeks later at a family barbecue, does any of that make sense? Well, is that the new reality of presidential power? The authority to decide without review, without a judicial system, without a trial, without accountability from anyone, and without protection from the Constitution. A president can simply declare your life over. And that is Reality Check. And again, that was a look at the Assassination Czar program, as they call it, from last summer. Now, you can make your voice heard on this story and other parts of this Reality Check special throughout the evening. You can head over to my Facebook page. It's very simple to find. All you have to do is search Ben Swann. Well, meanwhile, tonight, the use of drones by U.S. military to attack targets overseas, that's pretty well documented. But as we have told you in Reality Check for many months, despite the fact that it has received much less attention from the national media, thousands of U.S. drones will soon be deployed above American soil. That includes U.S. military drones and the information they are collecting and sharing. Here's a look back at that Reality Check. The talk of drones over U.S. soil is fairly new. Mainly, it's because it was in February of this year that an otherwise boring Federal Aviation Administration bill included a section to integrate drones into national airspace, including over U.S. cities. So what are we talking about in terms of numbers? There are currently 63 drone launch sites in 20 states. The FAA projects 30,000 drones could be in use domestically by 2020, just 8 years from now. Nearly 50 companies are currently developing around 150 different drone systems, and already drones are in use along the U.S.-Mexico border. In fact, the Homeland Security Department ordered so many drones it can't keep them all flying and doesn't have a good plan for how to use them. That's according to a new audit from the department's Inspector General. It was released yesterday. But what you may also not realize is that already the U.S. military is flying drones over U.S. soil and U.S. cities, and some not so successfully. An unmanned Navy surveillance aircraft crashed into a marsh in southern Maryland yesterday. Didn't cause any injuries. That Global Hawk, it's a high-altitude drone aircraft. It normally carries sophisticated cameras and sensors, was on a test mission from a naval air station about 65 miles southeast of Washington. The ground pilot apparently lost control of the plane. Now, the Navy wants to use the drones, they say, to monitor shoreline and to keep an eye out for enemy boats. But despite the enemy boat story, what we know is that the U.S. military is not only collecting information on Americans right now, but they're also sharing that information with local law enforcement, who, by the way, under the rule of law, would otherwise be required to obtain a search warrant. According to military documents obtained by CBS News, there is vague language that permits use of military drones to assist local, state, and federal law enforcement for the purposes of preventing, detecting, or investigating other violations of law. In any of these cases, the Fourth Amendment protections against illegal search and seizure and the Fifth Amendment due process violations are being committed illegally by law enforcement and the military. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul has now introduced a bill. It's called the Preserving Freedom from Unwarranted Surveillance Act of 2012. The bill would prohibit the use of drones by the government except when a warrant is issued for its use in accordance with the requirements of the Fourth Amendment, with only a few extreme exceptions.
Police do have power, and I want police to catch rapists and murderers, but they ask a judge, and we separate the police from the people who finally make the decision on someone coming in your house. So even if a rapist is loose in D.C. tonight, the police will call a judge in the middle of the night, wake him or her up and say, we think there's a rapist in the neighborhood, can we go in X address? And so those are things that are very, very important to protecting innocent individuals. And a drone is a very, very powerful way of snooping on behavior. And I don't want them monitoring every bit of my behavior.
But what you need to know is that while these drones are currently being used for snooping without warrants, which is a major constitutional problem, many police departments are already asking that they be allowed to arm their drones, requesting permission to arm drones with weapons like tear gas and rubber bullets or taser-style rounds. Police departments promise to only use these tools against criminals. Just like the military says overseas drones are only being used on terrorists. We know that's not true. And that is Reality Check. The talk of drones and the assassination of terrorists, even if they're U.S. citizens, is a story that Reality Check has been telling you for nearly 2 years. But it was less than 2 weeks ago when NBC News obtained a copy of the Obama administration's so-called rules for assassinating U.S. citizens. What President Obama told me about this kill list in a face-to-face interview last September, plus a look at the details of that memo in this Reality Check. Can the office of the president play the role of judge, jury, and executioner when it comes to terror suspects, even U.S. citizens? A 16-page memorandum has been leaked to NBC News. It explains the process the administration has been using for its assassination program. The Justice Department memo concludes that the U.S. government can order the killing of American citizens if they are believed to be senior operational leaders of al-Qaeda or an associated force. And that is the case even if there is no intelligence indicating they are engaged in an active plot to attack the U.S. The memo says in part, quote, the condition that an operational leader present an imminent threat of violent attack against the United States does not require the United States to have clear evidence that a specific attack on the U.S., persons, and interests will take place in the immediate future, end quote. So in short, in order to be labeled an imminent threat, you're not required to actually be an imminent threat. It was in September of last year when I had the chance to interview President Obama one-on-one. And when I did, I asked him specifically about this so-called presidential kill list. How do you, as president, or any president for that matter, regardless of party or person, utilize that power to assassinate even U.S. citizens?
Well, first of all, you're basing this on reports in the news that have never been confirmed by me, and I don't talk about our national security decisions in that way.
Well, as it turns out, it's not just the president himself making these decisions, because the memo explains an informed, high-level official of the U.S. government may determine that the targeted American has been recently involved in activities posing a threat of a violent attack, and that there is no evidence suggesting that he has renounced or abandoned such activities. That memo does not define the words recently or activities. As we've told you a number of times, these drone strikes have already killed American citizens living overseas, including Muslim cleric Anwar al-Awlaki, who, as I mentioned to the president, was a U.S. citizen. He was born in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And while the government claimed that he was a threat to the United States, no evidence of that threat was made public. Al-Awlaki was not afforded trial, nor was he charged with treason, which does not require him to be in the country. But he wasn't the only American targeted by the assassination program. 2 weeks after Al-Awlaki was killed, the U.S. used a drone strike to kill Al-Awlaki's 16-year-old son, Abdul Rahman Al-Awlaki. That 16-year-old was killed while at a family barbecue, and he too was a U.S. citizen born in Denver, Colorado. So what this means for you is that there is no clause in the Bill of Rights that suspends due process because of fear. Every time I talk about this issue, I get emails from people saying that Anwar al-Awlaki deserved to die. But I am yet to hear one reason, just one reason, why his 16-year-old son needed to die. The truth is, no one has legitimately answered that question. Not viewers, not this administration, not even the president himself. And that is exactly the problem. And that is Reality Check. And again, if you want to make your voice heard on this, you can head over to my Facebook page and find it by searching Ben Swann. Now, that is the end of this portion specifically dealing with drones, so we would love your feedback on the drone strike program over U.S. soil and overseas. When we come back, Reality Check on a couple of other issues.